So now we're going to advance to further yamas and niyamas. I'm actually going to write them down so that we know what we're dealing with, and we're going to cover a few of them. So the first one we said was ahimsa, satya. This one is asteya, Pretty sure this is Brahmacharya. And this one is aparigraha. The niyamas. Saucha. And good, just in case you're not coming to every class, you can get like a summary of what they actually are. All right, so we already said ahimsa is non-violence. And remember the phrase ahimsa paramadharmo? It's also satya paramadharmo. Who remembers that ahimsa and satya are the foundations of all spirituality and morality? Right? That's a super important point to remember. These two are considered the foundations of everything else. Who can tell me why? Even if one of them. Anyone? You can guess.
Because the
Speak.
truth is one. This is the essence.
Okay. So why is truth as oneness? Why is it that truth being oneness makes it the foundation of all morality? That's right. We're getting deep. That's what's happening.
Because there is no love. It's more pure.
Pure.
Attract purity and all the other innocence and aspiration and everything.
I love it. So since truth is oneness and oneness is God, it means that truth is the foundation of all good qualities, because all good qualities are coming from that purity. That's excellent. Couldn't have said it better myself. Awesome. All right. So who knows what any of those other Sanskrit words mean? I love it. Go for it.
Asteya is non-coveting.
Actually, asteya is not non-coveting, but close. We're going to cover it together.
Wanting.
Stealing. It's very specific. But yes, it's similar. Anyone else? You can go again if you want. Let's see if anybody else. Anyone else have a clue? Huh? No, I was saying, does anyone else know any of these Sanskrit terms? Don't worry if you don't. You're not actually necessarily going to until you come to one of these classes.
Brahmacharya is also sexual energy.
Yes, sexual discipline. Well done. No, not aspiration. Nope, almost. Aparigraha means non-grasping. And it's close to a non-attachment. Non-attachment is actually one of the, if you're in the first class, there's 4 paths of yoga. One of the paths is Jnana Yoga. It's called Jnana Yoga Adhikari, meaning the practices of Jnana Yoga, the yoga of wisdom. And non-attachment is one of those things. That means it's practice, and it's called, and the word is Vairagra. So we'll cover that later. That's why we're going to do multiple ones. But aparigraha means non-grasping or non-coveting. Is it, I think, Julie? Julia. That's what you were reaching for, right? Yes, cool. Here, I want to make a point about Brahmacharya, because this is a big one. We're actually not going to discuss this in this class in depth. If you come on Monday, we're going to tackle sexual discipline as a foundation of yoga practice. And not just that, spiritual practice. And you know, how about this? There's no spiritual side to yoga. Yoga is spiritual. The term means union with God. So if you're not seeking to unite with God, you're not practicing yoga. And Brahmacharya actually means, Brahma or Brahman means spirit. Acharya or achar is conduct or actions. So the term Brahmacharya etymologically means conduct or actions which lead to spirit. So that's how important sexual discipline is. Actually, traditionally in yoga schools, it's translated as sexual discipline, or even in more strict schools, celibacy. But what they're saying is, if you don't have this one, you can't reach spirit. And this is a big one if you guys are around Monday, because the world is teaching people the opposite, and you see the way it's going, right? Sexual discipline is not a popular practice in the West at the moment. And spirituality is, genuine spirituality is in decline. So it's commensurate. All right, anybody else? Julia? No, people might be beginning their yoga journey. Yes, cleanliness. Also purity. And it's internal and external. That also will be covered in another class. What is santosha? Contentment. What word is it similar to that if you've done a yoga class, or if you've been even in this class, you may have heard? Why are you whispering? If you're going to say it, say it. Shanti, Shantosha, means also peacefulness. It's specifically inner, primarily. Tapas, not a popular topic.
Finger foods.
Yes, austerity. What does austerity mean? Anyone? How about this? And this is a hard one. For people for whom English is their first language, what does austerity mean? Don't worry about it. I know it's not your first language. You're excused. Huh? Yeah, not indulging can be an austerity, but it's not necessarily the definition. But think about it in practical English terms when you've heard the term. Mostly you've heard it mentioned as austerity measures for the economy, right? Okay, austerity means doing... Oh, hey, you want to say, Mimi?
Discipline.
It does mean discipline, but I would go further. Actually, because austerity... How about... Mimi, you know this. What does the Sanskrit word tapas actually mean, etymologically, meaning at its root? It doesn't mean austerity. Actually, it means to burn. So, austerity means doing something difficult now for greater gain later. Actually, it goes even further. It actually means suffering now for greater gain later, but it means doing something difficult. For example, when Shukri was talking about fasting and how fasting damaged him, the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Song of God, part of the Mahabharata, it talks about austerity under the different influences of energy which govern the world. And so it essentially goes, the essential teaching is austerity performed in the incorrect way or for the incorrect reason bears ill fruit. So that means doing something difficult. Fasting can be an austerity, which brings benefit. But if it's performed in an incorrect way or for an incorrect reason, it bears the opposite fruit. But if it's done correctly, it can bring great fruit, right? It's purifying, it's cleansing, it can help you in your spiritual journey. So that's in the form of an austerity, doing something difficult for a greater gain later. And it means being anything difficult. So how about this? There's a quote from the Mahabharata, my favorite scripture. And a king is being asked by the god of Dharma various questions. And one question is, what is austerity? He says, how can a person gain anything? And the king says, anything can be gained through austerity. And because there's a science to this. We were talking about the subtle realms and how everything physical comes from the non-physical. By increasing your mental power, your emotional power through austerity, you then have the power to manifest things directly out of the mental realm into the physical realm. That's the science behind austerity. That's why we do things. So they'll do things like fasting, chanting mantras, taking vows of silence, prayer, going on long pilgrimages, even giving in charity to the point of your own poverty, things like that. So these are considered austerities, which if performed correctly with the right intention, purify and also elevate. And so the word in Sanskrit means to burn, which shows you actually it's suffering, right? Austerity is voluntarily suffering now for the elevation of the soul. But we're not going to talk about that more today. Swadhyaya, I'm not going to ask Mimi what that means, but I am going to ask one of you. Yes. Why is that important? Hold on, wait, I asked her.
Oh, sorry.
That's it. Why are you jumping on
Because it's like a reminder for yourself. It's not just like, and it also comes from yourself. It's not something that someone else make you do that.
Okay, that's good. Anyone else? The reason I ask these guys is because they are in the Swadhyaya, run by Mimi, yoga teacher training. How about somebody else from the Swadhyaya school? Yeah.
Because we're always learning, the self-study, we're always growing.
Okay.
I don't know.
But I like the boldness though.
Everybody learns in a different way.
Yes.
Everybody learns different.
True.
And you need, and it's like she said, more believable when it comes from out of yourself. It's easier to hold on to.
Okay. True. Mimi. Why is Swadhyaya important? And how about this? For the record, on camera, why did you name your yoga school Swadhyaya? First, why is it important, and why did you name your yoga school Swadhyaya?
Why it's important is because we're constantly being met with a whole bunch of information, and it's up to us to research or inquire and continually ask questions. It's the only way that we'll continue to grow in our knowledge and our evolution.
So what is that? How is that related to self-study?
And that self-study, that self-inquiry, it's not just the external inquiry, it's the internal inquiry that will bring us closer to oneness, bliss.
Perfect. Why'd you name your school?
Because it was the self-inquiry that my guru put me on the path of that inspired the name. And
Awesome.
I realized I was always going to be studying. It's a never-ending thing for me.
I know, that's hard, huh? Agreed.
Because Rumi says that we are a ocean in a drop of water. So to study yourself, you're studying the whole ocean.
Woo! That was good. That's exactly right. Here's how, on a super practical level. So Swadhyaya means self-study, self-observation, self-inquiry, self-understanding. If you don't know, I'll be even more specific. Let me write this. It's understanding how your own ego works, how your own mind works, how your emotions work. how your physical body works, and how we want to really get to how your soul works. Right? So you are the soul, and these are the coverings. So Swadhyaya includes studying your own coverings, your own conditioning. If you don't know how you've been conditioned, it's going to be much harder to get out of that condition. Everyone agree? Right? Did you want to say something?
No, yeah, it's very true about this conditioning. Knowing about your conditioning, your patterns, your what is put on your CD while since you were born until today, it is very important because layers by layers you can get them off and get to the center.
Exactly.
Connect to your true self.
The soul. The soul is covered by these things, and these things have what we call samskaras, which are impressions in them, and those impressions push us to action. If you don't know the reasons behind your actions, it's going to be harder to change them. Right? And so that's the value of Swadhyaya. And Swadhyaya goes deep. It means, how does my ego work? It means actually, how about this? Looking at yourself first. Right? Say you're in a relationship. Who are you looking at? I'm a counselor. When I have somebody sitting in my chair, how many people you think come in and say, this is what I've been doing wrong? Zero. Literally, I can't recall it ever. I've had hundreds, maybe thousands of clients. Nobody's ever come in and been like, this is what I'm guilty of. Right? No, everybody's innocent. Have you noticed this? Every ego especially is pure snow, right? Wrong, but according to the ego it is. So if you know that, right, then you can be able to undo the trap that the ego and mind gets us into. Cool. And Iswaya Pranidhana. This one is awesome. This one's a tough one. Actually, you know what though? If you were here 2 classes ago, I actually said, who wants to cheat? So far, Shukri's been the best cheater. I see Ashley contesting him. It's a race. That's going to be hard. That's buried in there. It is actually literally buried. Sada, do you know what it is? What kind of assistant is it? I'm kidding. I'm going to give it to you. It's going to be buried. I'll tell you, how about I give you a clue in your notes? Ishvara, it's in the class of the self, soul, and ego. And it is under the section of God, what God is. How God manifests. Oh, I did that last time, didn't I?
Is it similar to Ishtadevata?
It can be. Almost. All right, I'm going to give it to you. Ishvara means Lord. And it's God in personal form. If you go back and look at your notes, I said God manifests as Ishvara, Brahman, and Atman. And then he has 3 basic qualities, Sat, Chit, and Ananda. So Ishvara, Brahman, Atman, those are 3 forms of God. Atman is the inner self, or the soul. Brahman is impersonal spirit. And Ishvara is God manifest in personal form. It's translated as Lord, or sometimes simply God. The reason that's important is because this term, Ishvara Pranidhana, means surrender to God. Raise your hand if you knew that surrender to God was one of the foundations of yoga practice. Julia knew. Ashley, you learned something new today. Surrender to God is one of the foundations of yoga practice. In fact, he put it 10 because after you do all this, you're doing this to surrender. Why would surrender to God be one of the foundations of yoga practice? Oh, this is a softball. Yoga. What is yoga? Union with God. So why would surrender to God be a foundation of that? Why would surrender to God be essential for uniting with God?
Because God is within you.
He is within you. Yeah, but I think even if he was outside of you, it might not be. How about this? And this wasn't a textbook one. This is one that you might have to think up. The reason surrender to God is one of the foundations of yoga practice. The reason surrender to God is necessary for uniting with God is because you know what? After we're doing everything, it still is not enough. Actually, it says in one scripture, those who reach God are those who God selects. And you get selected by God through your practices. Does that make sense? So you qualify yourself for union with God, but the actual union takes place through the will of God. Everyone follow that? And the way you gain God's desire for you to unite with Him is total self-surrender. Total surrender to God. And you know what it also means? When you totally surrender to God, that means you're ready to give up ego, mind, emotions, body. Until you're ready to give these up, until you're ready to transcend them, go beyond them, you actually can't fully unite with your true self, which is beyond them. And that surrender is a sign that you're ready. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, so today, that was the intro. Today, we're actually going to discuss 3 topics that are interrelated. Asteya, Aparigraha, and Santosha. And let's see if anybody can guess where we're going to this. How are these 3 things related? Non-stealing, non-grasping, non-coveting, and Santosha being content. Actually, here, let me go into Aparigraha a little bit more. Non-grasping, this is a better definition of it. It means not desiring more than you need for your yoga practice. And what is your yoga practice? Uniting with God and controlling your mind. So you only want what you need in order to control your mind so that you can unite with God. You don't want more than that, and you're not grasping for more than that. That's what a parigraha is. Julia, did that make sense?
Oh yeah.
It makes a massive difference, actually. What's the opposite of parigraha? Oh, Shukri knows this, so I'm not going to allow him to answer this. If you put an A in front of a Sanskrit word, what does it do? It negates it. Right. So what is parigraha? Huh? Grasping. What's another word for somebody who's always grasping? Greed. Exactly. So parigraha could also be translated as non-greed. Whatever I have is enough. Okay, so how are these related? Non-stealing, non-grasping, and being content, peaceful within.
When you are content, you don't need more than you have, and you are not tempted to steal.
Ooh! Succinct, eloquent. Exactly. Did you hear that? Can you repeat that, actually? Can you repeat that just as you said it?
When you have santosha, the contentment, this means you are inside, you have your peace of contentment, you are content, so you don't greed for or want to grasp something else because you already have that you makes you content, and you don't have no need to steal from anything or for any reason.
That's awesome. Right? And not seeking more than you need, then you actually get peace. Do you see how yoga is teaching the opposite of what the Western world teaches? Right? The opposite world, the Western world teaches, grab all you can, even if it's somebody else's. Right? And they're rarely at peace. Right? So there's one word that kind of unites all of those. Like, what are we talking about? What that means, how about this? What word defeats these things? What if you possess this thing, if you have this, then you're not going to be at peace. You're going to want to keep grabbing, and you may even take what doesn't belong to you. Desire. Wow. Desire. So, desirelessness is one of the foundations of yoga and spiritual practice. Desirelessness. Hard, huh? Cool. Has anyone studied any Buddhism? Yeah? All right, Julia. What are the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism?
What is it called? The group, the Sangha?
Nope, that's not one of the Four Noble Truths, though. The Sangha is one of the three jewels.
The three jewels.
The three jewels, since I mentioned it, of Buddhism are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha is the enlightened one himself. Dharma is the path, the way. And the Sangha is what?
Community.
The community. So this is a Sangha. It's one of the jewels of spiritual practice is to be in Sangha. Okay. That was a nice little side note. But,
They're not coming right now.
okay. That's cool. I like that. Anyone else study any Buddhism? No. Okay. So, I've studied a little. And the four noble truths. Uh-oh, they came.
Remember one. All life is suffering. Right?
Wow. Yep. And that's the first one. How about this? This is a noble truth that the enlightened one taught. All life here is suffering. They basically taught life is suffering. How many people agree? Right? It's not all suffering, but it's a big part of it. Right? And the Buddha said this. So, you know what? And the rest follow. Come on, this is a softball. Look at the board. What's the second one? You got it. You got it.
No.
Okay, no worries. So he said, all life is suffering. The second one is, desire is the cause of suffering. The third one is, suffering can be ended by ending desire. And the fourth one, desire can be ended by following this eightfold path. And so he has 8 paths. 8 things. They include right thinking, right meditation. I can't remember them all right now, unfortunately. But it's 8 things that you do, and it's all right. You have to do it right. But anyway, what I'm focusing on today is desire. How many people have actually thought about that? How many people have thought about desire itself being the source of your suffering? Anyone? Liv, how is desire the source of your suffering?
Because desire prevents you from being in the present moment, because you're constantly in a state of what you don't have right now. And also it puts you in a state of gratitude. It doesn't put you in a state of gratitude. You lose gratitude for the present moment. Yeah.
Wow. That's deep. She likes that, huh? Yasmin likes that. Cool. Did you raise your hand? Yes.
Desire creates expectations.
Ooh.
So if your expectations are not met, this creates suffering. Suffer because you don't met your desires.
There you go. We're getting busy. Who else raised their hand? Let's have, was it Yasmin? Yasmina?
Yeah, it also works at like a country level, because I did some studying of this in my economics degree about how countries that are more equal are more happy, and countries that are less equal tend to have less happiness. And so it kind of relates to this idea of like desire and contentment, because if you're around a group of people and there's like clear differences in how much people have, then there's going to be more sense of like not having enough and desire and unmet expectations, and that leads to lower contentment. So it works like at the individual level and like globally.
Wow, well said, well said. Mimi?
I've been studying how desire leads to greed, and then greed leads to anger, and this whole cascading effect. And I also found it interesting that the desire for something that you can't have and the desire for something that you can have still can both culminate in this suffering that we experience. So say you have a desire for something you can't have, then the greed comes up and you start wanting more of it. You start thinking about how to get it. Your mind is always on it. But if you are able to satisfy that desire, then it leads to the ego. The ego starts getting bigger and bigger around, I got this, I'm the man, I'm the person, you know, and that sort of thing. So it can spiral in both directions. Desire for what you can't have and desire for what you can have, leading to more suffering.
Yeah, the Buddha actually talked about it. He didn't just stop there. He actually expounded on it. And I wish I could find that verse. I keep looking for it and I can't find it. But he goes, desire causes suffering. And then he says, essentially, and I'm going to paraphrase, he says, because your desire causes suffering because it's painful when you don't get what you want. Anyone can relate? Right? It's painful when you don't get what you want. It's painful when you lose what you have. Right? It's painful when you get what you want and it's not what you thought it was. It's painful when you get what you want and it comes with something you don't want. And he goes on and on. And he says, actually, all things that are gained are lost in this world as well. That's the nature of the world. How about that? Which speaks back to vairagra, right? Detachment. That's why detachment is a yogic quality, because without detachment, you're always going to be desiring. Yes.
I think also desire keeps you in the external, and you're constantly seeking for something that is external, and you forget that everything you need is within yourself.
Deep. Shoot, look at you getting some head nods and everything back there. Smiles. Cool. Anybody else want to speak on how desire causes suffering? No? Okay, cool. Yes.
The desire, the right desire leads to evolution in a certain way.
Yes, this is something good. How about this? It's actually impossible for you to be without desire. So we're going to fine-tune, that's right, we're going to do it, fine-tune the Buddha's teaching. Because there is, let's call it the self. Because we're going to get kind of deep. So there's can I erase this? Yeah? Cool. And this is actually will answer a lot of philosophical questions that actually pop up in people's minds. So there is the self, soul, and ego. So from people who were here 2 classes ago, or who've come to other classes and talk about this a lot, who can tell me what these are and the differences between them? It's definitely in your notes from 2 classes ago. It's a big section. That was the title. What's the self, Sada?
True self, the God within, is pretty much your soul as well.
So the self is God. Right. It's the source. It's the original Godhead. Source. The soul is your individual self. I'll take that. Individual true self. Could we say it like that? Yeah? Who knows the Sanskrit word for self and soul? I hear a lot of mumbling. Atman, yes. Both of these are the Atman. All right, now you're going to get bonus points if you can tell me. This is also in those notes. It's the term for the self and then the soul. Both of them have Atman on the end, but how do we distinguish them? Sanskrit. I'll give you a hint. For the self, oh, go ahead. Whoa. Go on. No, read those notes closer.
So what's the question?
The question is, what's the Sanskrit word for the self? And the self is God.
Brahman is in personal spirit.
Yep.
And Bhagavan is God as a person.
Bhagavan is God as a person, but there's that's two. There's three.
Katyayana.
Who? No, it's Chaitanya. That's the living force. Purusha means the original man. That's another term for God. Uh-oh. Yes. Wow. Padam Atma is the name for the original self. What does Padam mean? Supreme. Yes, the supreme. So it means the supreme self, the highest self. This one is going to be tougher, but I did bring it. I did mention it in the notes. What's the Atma term for the individual soul? All right. Yes. Wow. Jivatma. So a jiva means the individual soul. Jivatma or jiva. Paramatma is the supreme soul. So they both have the same qualities. What's the difference between the self and the soul? Between the Paramatma and the Jivatma? This gets deep, but Shukri said it. From the, how would you say, to use a analogy, the soul would be the drop of water and the self would be the ocean, right? So the soul is the individualized portion of God, and that's each one of us. And the Godhead is the whole thing, the oneness, right? And what is the ego? Yeah, so it's a body. It's a covering, right? The bodies are coverings on the soul. Here's what's really important. The bodies cannot cover the Paramatma. The bodies can cover the soul. Does that make sense? Right? Meaning the self, the soul, is always unaffected by all material circumstances. Meaning God is always beyond the mind, the ego. So that means your highest self, your true self, is beyond all of your suffering. Always. And in fact, here's the trick of it. Body covering of illusion. The truth is that this individualization is an illusion, right? Whereas in fact, as Shukri said, what Rumi said, we're actually the ocean, pretending to be a drop, right? So actually, we're beyond the ego and everything. But the reason I brought this up is because these are some other bodies. The intellect, the mind, emotions, and physical body. If you guys remember that from 2 classes ago. right? Remember this? The koshas, these are the coverings on the soul. How about this? All of the bodies can have desires. And this is why I'm bringing up. All of these things can have desires. Everyone agree with that? Meaning God herself has a desire. The individual soul itself has desire. The ego definitely has desire. The intellect can have its own desires. The mind can have its own desires. The emotions can have their own desires. And even the physical body can. Everyone can recognize that? Let's give some practical examples. I like to use this one because this happens to me sometimes. Has anyone been so hungry that like you find yourself searching for food unconsciously? I mean, you're conscious, but you know what I mean? Like your body takes over, and then like you're 4 bites in before you realize you're eating. Anyone have that happen to them before? Right? Yeah? That's the body. That's the physical body wanting to preserve and nourish itself. And that desire even goes beyond the emotions. How many people emotionally, mentally, you don't want to eat, but your body does, right? So the physical body has desires. How about emotions? This is a clear one. How many people have had your emotionally you desire something? Intellectually, you know you shouldn't have it. Right? So the emotional body can have desires of its own, right? What about the mind? Right? If you get into those people like to play mind games, right? Intellectuals, right? What is it called? Intellectual jugglery. Like very smart people, they like to play games. They can have intellectual desires, desire to simulate it. So everyone getting this, all the bodies can have it. Ego. The ego's desires. What? So the ego is the body or the covering of the illusion. Shukri, what is the illusion that this covering called the ego creates? Anybody else? Separation. Yes. Separation. Wow. It's something else it also creates, though. Separation. How does it create this idea of separation? What does it create to create that idea? I am. Ooh, like it. So it creates the idea of an I am. I'm going to just give it to you. An individual identity. The ego creates the illusion that you're an individual. So the ego is the first covering on the soul, which creates the illusion that you're an individual rather than the self. Does everyone get that? Okay. So the ego's desires then, on what are they going to be focused? I. In the Mahabharata, a character, see, the Nakula Sahadev says, I, me, and mine are death. We, us, and our are Brahman. Everyone get that? No. Should I say it again or should I write it? All right, how about I say it again? In the Mahabharata, a character speaking. He says, I, me, and mine are death. We, us, and our are Brahman. And what is Brahman? Man, you said it just now.
Impersonal spirit.
It means spirit. So everyone, who wants to explain that, what I just said?
That the selfishness, I, me, and mine leads to death, and the collective leads to spirit.
Why?
Oneness.
Wow, exactly. So the ego has a desire, and its desire is focused on the I am. However, the soul can have desire, and who remembers what Metatron said? People, this was the question. Why this in the first place? Why did God make us in the first place, right? And Archangel Metatron answered that question for us.
You exist, or in God desires movement, expression, and experience.
Archangel Metatron, the question was, what's the point of all this? Really, people ask, what's the point when they're suffering, right? Right? And he said, God desires, so this is God's desire. I'm going to shoot it down here. Experience. Movement. Expression. And he said, that is why you as an individual Jivatma exists. Why did God send forth herself as a parent multitudes of individuals? For experience, movement, and expression. So that shows you that God has desire. And then the soul, being part of God, right, will have the same desire, individualized. Everyone grab that? So that means the reason you're here individually is because you desire experience, movement, and expression, but you desire it a particular way. Whereas God desires it infinitely. Does that make sense? So the soul has desires as well. 1 second. I saw you. I'm going to get to you. 1 second. Right? But then when the soul gets covered, this grandiose plan that it had gets lost in its consciousness. And the focus becomes so reduced to me, I, right now. Right? I, right now. And then it gets further with the lower bodies, more desires are added. So do you see the key to actual yoga is giving up the desires of the body in order to return first to the soul and then to the self. Does that make sense? How about that? How about this? We're programmed with the idea that happiness is getting what we want. Aren't we? Right? So we're going to differentiate. I like to say this. This is pleasure versus contentment. And this is, in the Mahabharata, that same king is asked, what is happiness? What is true happiness? And he says, true happiness is contentment. What's another word for contentment besides Santosha? If you to be satisfied. 1 second. Somebody wants to see me. So, I know, I feel you. So going back to what we were, so how about this? Actually, this is a good point to summarize. This is a good point to finish with. I always say this. Peace, which is the Sanskrit word, Shanti, from which Santosha comes from, is better than pleasure. In the West, however, we're taught seek pleasure, seek pleasure, seek pleasure. The reason peace is better than pleasure is because pleasure always alternates with pain. It's the nature of the game. Quite simply, pleasure means getting your senses pleasantly stimulated, meaning getting the bodies what they want. The problem is you're always going to get something you don't want with it, or you're not going to get it. And when that happens, so if your happiness is dependent upon pleasure, you're going to be unhappy. Guaranteed. That's the nature of the game. Santosha comes from within. It comes from the self, because remember, the nature of the self is bliss. The reason peace is better than pleasure, and peace comes when the mind is stilled, when the desires are in check, then you're in touch with the self. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says, when the mind is stilled, the self within is already reached. To such a person, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. So, yoga teaches the opposite of the world. Seek the self and seek peace by giving up your desires, and you'll be happy. Cool. All right, so let's end with 3 ohms. And I had so much more. Maybe we'll touch on it a little bit next week because I had some scriptures. You know I did if you came to my class. Anyway, so let's end with 3 ohms. Everyone take a nice deep breath in. And exhale.